This video is on What If Naruto Was the Eternal Sage Part 1. The like goal for this video is 35 likes. Sooner the like goal is meets sooner I will upload next part for this What If. Disclaimer, I don't own Naruto nor this What If. Summary, from Rokudame Hokage to the second coming of the Snake Sannin, from Kumo's Thunder God to the Water Demon of Ushiage Cure. The being known as the Eternal Sage has journeyed across an infinite number of realities and played an infinite number of roles. Now, he takes the place of Uzumaki Naruto and shakes the very heavens themselves. Loud and obnoxious laughter rang clear through the early morning skies of Konohagakure no Sato, quickly followed by shouted expletives and roars of rage. 10-year-old Uzumaki Naruto had just succeeded in doling out retribution worthy of the mythical kitsunes to a number of shopkeepers who had unfairly overcharged the blonde child for certain items. The group of Chunins in hot pursuit were the unlucky few who were on duty the morning that Naruto's pranks occurred. Running through their minds was the thought of just how a kid capable of such ingenuity could be an academy dead last. The Chunin in the lead quickly refocused on the orange-wearing child only to realize that he was in fact gaining on him. In his anticipation of an end to the chase, he neglected to take into account the fact that for the past hour, Naruto had maintained a steady lead in this game of cat and mouse. A more experienced ninja would have suspected a trap, and rightly so. As Naruto neared the edge of the roof, he was on. His sharp hearing confirmed what his too sensitive nose, a far more sensitive than loudmouth Kiba's, and that just doesn't make Sensei had already told him, so, a quick vulpine grin flitted across his face just as the Chunin directly on his tail reached out to grab him, only to witness Naruto dive from the roof they were on, curl his body into a ball and sail smoothly through a conveniently open window and fluidly unroll into an uninterrupted run. The Chunin cursed because he was too close to the blonde to follow and absently mused that he had been well played. The ninja immediately following the hoodwinked Chunin was however quick to follow Naruto. Executing the same maneuver, he prepared to shift his roll smoothly into a run, only to crash against a solid object. Before the unfortunate Chunin could recover from the damage, his comrade who had already jumped after him in a similar motion crashed into him as he rebounded, and together they fell into an open dumpster that sprung shut with a click. Naruto's laughter let the remaining Chunin know that that was no unfortunate accident. Continuing in his run, Naruto thought about the genius of painting around the small window so small his malnourished stunted frame could just fit through it, to give the illusion that it was big enough for a full-grown man to fit through. He quickly left the building, knowing that the Chunin would have realized where he would pop out of and would resume the chase. However, his little window trick had bought him the few seconds he knew he would need for what he was about to do. When he had planned this prank out, Ruka-sensei, I can think so ahead. He had ensured that various escape routes would be open to him, and even allowed for the possibility of the ninja chasing him, managing to anticipate some of those routes. True to his prediction, he glanced up to find several shapes flitting in and out of the edge of his vision, lying in wait for him if he took certain paths in his bid to escape. A quick mental calculation revealed that of his 7 escape routes, only 2 remained uncompromised. In one world, Uzumaki Naruto would have chosen the left path, eventually run into Ruka, and life would continue as we know it. He chose right, and the story of Uzumaki Naruto ended 10 hours later. While the story of Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto began, Sarutobi Hiruzen was having a bad day. He got out of bed with more aches in his old bones than he went to bed with. He had walked into his dining room to find his son eating. Well, that was before said son noticed him and chose to leave rather than finish his food, and thus end up speaking to him. To top it all off, no matter what his ninja might say, he suffered the backlash of whatever mischief Naruto got up to more than any other aide delivered in the doubling and sometime tripling of his paperwork, so that morning was not a good one for him. And to make it worse, his door opened to admit an old man with bandages covering a majority of his body, including one of his eyes. When the Yami no Shinabi came calling, it could mean nothing good. What do you want, Danzo? As you can see, I am very busy this morning, Sarutobi bit out. We both know that your extra workload is as a result of your softness, was the reply. Sighing in weary exasperation, the Hokage replied, "When will you drop this argument, Danzo? I have made my views on this matter clear." As always happened in the past during such arguments, Danzo was getting agitated. "You allow that child to waste his potential. You and I know just what that child could become if only." A broken bar rising from his chair, Sarutobi thundered, "Enough, listen to yourself. A broken bar? You call him a child in one breath and turn around to propose him becoming a weapon." The frustration of his morning had finally come to a head. Danzo stopped for a moment and took a good look at his former teammate. He realized that years of seeing Hiruzen behind a desk had lulled him into a false sense of complacency when it came to his teammate. Internally, he decided to scrap the present form of offense and switch tactics. "Very well, however, you allow him to be treated as he is, and without the proper guidance he might give in to the beast sealed into him and turn against us all. No one knows just how containing the Kibai will affect the child's mental state. You will see Konoha burn because of some misplaced sentiment." "Proper guidance? You mean torture disguised as training for the sole purpose of creating a weapon in the shell and guise of a child?" "If that is what it takes," Danzo stoically replied. Sarutobi was not normally one to be deterred, but when the Sandaime looked into Danzo's eyes he knew that none of his words were getting through and curse him, but he just wanted Danzo gone, so he sighed and settled back into his chair. A flicker of surprise crossed Danzo's face at Sarutobi's actions. As the aged Hokage lit his pipe, he decided on a course of action, anything to get this annoyance over and done with. His impatience would change the future of the elemental nations and cause no small amount of anxiety to an elder toad sage. After taking a few good puffs which served the dual purpose of calming him and aggravating his teammate, though he hid it well, he spoke the words that would damn a child's soul and change the fate of a nation. A broken bar, the fate of the world. "I hear your concerns, Danzo, really I do, but let me ask you this: why do you think I always make time for Naruto?" Danzo stilled, his devious mind quickly forming and discarding various thoughts and reaching different conclusions. A glance at Sarutobi revealed a calm visage that gave nothing away. Were he capable of such thought, he would have interpreted his teammate's question to mean that the aged Hokage considered it the least he could do for the poor child. However, his scheming mind was almost unable to accommodate such expressions of human kindness. Instead, he smirked and said, "I see. By becoming the only light in his darkness, you ensure his complete devotion to you." Turning to leave, Danzo said, "It's good to see you haven't lost it all, Hiruzen." Sarutobi sighed sadly at the various twists and turns of his former teammate's thoughts but made no move to correct him. His misled conclusions would satisfy him for a while. He turned around when he felt a chill wind and found the window open. Dismissing it from his mind, he prepared to return to his work, and he allowed a moment of thought to think calmly that Naruto would never learn of this discussion. Crouched behind some boxes on the roof of the Ninja Academy, Uzumaki Naruto stared blankly ahead as his young mind tried to comprehend his world and conceptions grumbling down around his ears. He paid no heed to the tears falling from his eyes as he tried to grasp the full importance of just what he had heard. It couldn't be true, right? There's no way something like a demon brat. We don't serve demons here. Leave, fox breath. Would be sealed into him. No way that the Hokage. What's up, old man? Ha, Irojiji, what was that orange book? I'm gonna become Hokage, so keep that hat for me. Would deceive him like that, but even as his little mind denied what he just learned, the facts added up in a way that just couldn't be denied. The nigh unlimited stamina, outrunning Chunin level ninjas for hours on end since the time he was 7, his injuries healing overnight, broken bones mending in hours, and torn skin sealing back up in mere minutes. The overdeveloped senses say when Kiba, sitting in the front row, tried to embarrass the teacher by pointing out he smelled like sex, probably having gotten some that very morning. A broken bar. Naruto, sitting in the back, knew that it was exactly 5 hours before class, and with a guy. Finally, there were the villagers and their hurled insults and slurs. Even Naruto with his overly optimistic view on life could not hide from the truth that he probably even subconsciously realized a while ago. It was in a numb haze that Naruto found himself sitting in his apartment, having no recollection of ever journeying there. Maybe the demon is taking me over. And he immediately had to smother a hysterical bubble of laughter that tried to erupt out of his throat. Now that he had a grasp on himself, if somewhat a shaky one, he wondered what he could do. The first thought was confronting the old man Anno, the Hokage of demanding explanations. He quickly stomped that idea out of existence, not wanting any more lies. No matter how he thought about it, there seemed no way out. Were his faith in the people around him not shaken so thoroughly, he might have fled to Rukia for reassurance and comfort. Indeed, at another time, perhaps in another situation, young Naruto would have worked through the seeming betrayal, clinging stubbornly to his determination to never give up and become all the more powerful for it. But now, in this place, and at this time, the young lad was just a little too broken, just a little too beat down by the harshness of his life that he couldn't go it alone. Naruto came out of his thoughts to find himself holding a worn and discarded ninjato that he salvaged from some damaged training ground during one of the times he played ninja. By himself, he contemplated and discarded the thought of suicide, not because he was too strong to stoop so low, but because he believed that he could not harm himself fast enough to overcome the freaky demonic rate of healing he apparently had. At least, that was how he felt until a memory from long ago flashed before his eyes, of when he had a kunai go through his palm during one of his self-training mishaps. He remembered morbidly watching as his wound tried to heal around the object in his path and failed. Casting another glance at the ninjato, he burst into motion, never giving himself time to reconsider. Somewhere, maybe not in this life, he believed he could find the acceptance he needed, and even he recognized the futility of pushing at a mountain. He considered the various lectures given in the academy about fatal points on the human body, the heart. It was then, he gripped the handle of the weapon, placed the tip under his beating heart, and with a rare content smile on his face he fell forward. A quick silver flash of pain gave him second thoughts before it dulled, and he felt his little heart valiantly fighting to keep up its symphony of life via broken bar and failing. That was when he felt it, a surge of burning red, demonic chakra searing through his body to his heart and trying to heal the damage done. At this point Naruto was barely conscious enough to feel the chakra fight to heal him with a blade in the way. Finally about to fade away, he gave a moment to think of the family he never knew and pray that he meets them in the next life. With that last thought, he closed his eyes and gave into the blackness. The Kibai was startled awake for the first time in a decade to find his host's body failing around him and the mental landscape crumbling. He had a split second to react. A broken bar and he made the wrong call. A seasoned shinobi would have pushed the panic and acted. The Kibai, for all that he had existed for centuries, never had to learn that brute force did not solve everything. So, he sent a surge of concentrated heat to the injury and watched in glee as it burnt away the obstruction preventing his host from getting healed. His glee turned to horror as he realized that Naruto's young body could not handle the potency of his ki, and he watched helplessly as the very organ he tried to heal corroded due to the toxicity of his ki. The mental landscape around him began to vanish as his host finally left the cruel world. Seconds earlier, a broken bar at the first surge of pure unadulterated malevolence, the Sandaime Hokage was out of his seat quick as a shot, even as his conscious mind denied what his decades-old senses had confirmed. His body was already aligning with the window behind his desk, muscles flexing in preparation, chakra pooling in the required areas, and at the second surge of physical hatred he was off faster than any eye could track. It took the Anbu stationed in his office precious seconds to understand what their hair standing on end meant before they were in quick pursuit. With speed worthy of the professor himself, Sarutobi appeared in Naruto's apartment in a storm of chakra and a mind, already plotting ways to drag the upcoming battle out of range of the village with as little collateral damage as possible. The raging tsunami of chakra and sheer focus flickered and was snuffed out of existence. The Anbu dog, who was The first of his group to arrive, a left eye red and spinning furiously in its socket. A stumbled as he came out of his Shunshin, his Sharingan, ensuring that the sight before him would haunt his nightmares until the day he died. The professor, who had arrived like a force of nature, was nowhere to be seen. In its place an aged man stood, staring at one of his life's many failures that, although in no way the worst, one that he will always regret. Slowly, knowing that he was already too late, 10 years too late, he moved over to the corpse of his grandson in all but blood. The entire Anbu squad had arrived by this point, and the silence that permeated the room was reminiscent of when the body of the Yondaime was brought back that day, a decade ago, softly, gently, like a mountain being worn down by time, an aged oak tree bowing before the unyielding storm. He fell to his knees at Naruto's side. With hands so steady they shook, he reached out and drew the body closer. He was not aware he had tears in his eyes, and as he saw a few drops of liquid slide down the boy's cheeks, he absently wondered if the pipes were leaking again. Perhaps I should get someone to refurbish the entire building someday. Gripping the handle of the ninjato, he pulled it out, hating the blood that stained the blade. Much too soon, still a child and already has his blood on the blade. He discarded the thief that stole this child from him and bowed his head over the rapidly cooling body, and finally allowed himself to acknowledge that he will never hear the voice of Konoha's precious son and savior. Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto watched as once again, life proved too much for Uzumaki Naruto. He wouldn't blame the child, though he could never judge him for buckling under a weight that should never have been his to bear. Once again, he stood on an illusionary knife edge, knowing he was deluding himself into thinking that there existed a choice to be made at all: move on and leave this world to make do without the child of prophecy for as long as it existed anyway, or do as he has always done, as he would always do, and step forward to take his place. He thought with a faint smile, I was due a vacation anyway. And with that last thought, Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto descended into the corpse held in the arms of a sorrowful and broken old man. The Kyuubi raged as he felt his host's soul finally leave his body. He knew that he clung to his anger as a dying man might cling to a straw in a turbulent sea of terror and soul-searing fear. Then he felt it, the cold arms of nullity, the pure antithesis to reality and existence, the final full stop in every story that has ever begun at the call of the Shinigami, a broken bar. Death. When Namikaze Minato dared to shackle a god to foolish mortal whims, he could never grasp just what it was he had done, just what unnatural deed he had wrought. The Shinigami reached through the seal like it never existed and pulled a broken bar, and the Kyuubi knew pain. It was a testament to the sheer genius of the Yondaime Hokage that the death god met some resistance, tiny and unnoticeable as it was to it. Well, everything is a matter of perspective anyway. While the death god merely desired the soul of the Kyuubi, it desired it with a hunger to devour all of creation. It had no interest in the actual accumulated power of the Kyuubi. The seal placed on Naruto fought the extraction as best it could, and the result was the consciousness of the Kyuubi being removed ahead of its power rates. Doubtless, the power would have followed the soul eventually, that is, unless Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto had a thing to say about it. Through the pain of having his soul and consciousness separated from his power, the Kyuubi felt a wall slam down between the two parts, cutting off his power. With a howl at the added pain, the Kyuubi was finally devoured whole and the death god left, the only proof of its presence being the sheer lack of vitality in the world, almost as though someone had washed out all the colors in the world, leaving them dulled. The ninja in the room felt as though they had just rubbed shoulders with the Grim Reaper himself. Kakashi had already began spiraling into a pit of self-disgust and regret as he saw the Sandaime cradling Naruto's body. Minato-sensei, wake up, please wake up. Obito, no, Kakashi, it's Rina, broken bar, she's gone. He wondered why he even bothered, as his plans to retire from Anbu in time to take on a Genin team went up flames. The other ninja each remembered times when they interacted with the little child. True, more often than not, it was to catch him after some act of mischief, but not one of them could deny the good-natured fun and cheer he injected into everything. And so as they looked on as their leader mourned, they each offered up silent prayers, much like they would do for fallen comrades. Sarutobi pulled himself together and prepared to rise with the body. He stopped, the ninja around him going on alert as well. He wondered what had triggered his senses. For a moment he pondered if the person who did this was still around, firmly refusing to acknowledge with the lack of forced entry, struggle and the peaceful smile on Naruto's face. Meant and how long he could keep them alive. For a while they suffered his fury, and then he felt it again, a pulse of chakra. The ninja around him shifted in alarm, preparing themselves for anything, a broken bar well, almost anything. Jaws dropped, eyes widened and bodies flinched in shock as the body in the arms of the Hokage arched up, took in a deep breath and let loose a scream that penetrated to the bone, nay the very soul. Abandon hope, all ye who enter here, ye broken bar. Namikaze Uzumaki, Naruto has arrived. The Sandaime Hokage returned the greetings of the hospital staff he met on his way to his destination. It had been 2 months since that horrible day he had found Naruto bleeding to death from an attempted suicide. Even now, knowing that the child had survived, the memory still caused his breath to hitch in his chest and his body to tense. He finally arrived at the door to the private room that contained the comatose blue-eyed child. Though undetectable to almost everyone else, he easily made out the 2 Anbu guards that were stationed outside the room. He opened the door, preparing to go in, and froze in his steps. The Anbu was at his side in an instant, checking to see what had startled the professor. The sight before him caused his throat to close off and his body to tense. During the 2 months his body was in a coma, Naruto had been busy. As soon as his senses informed him that he was alone in the hospital room, save for the 2 Anbu outside the door, he got to work. The first thing he did was weave a smooth layer of chakra just underneath his skin, making sure not to let the untrained chakra of his new body surge in any way and alert the Anbu outside. While it was a relatively easy thing for him to pull off, he knew that for anyone else, save maybe Senjutsu, it would be practically impossible to accomplish. The purpose of the layer of chakra was to serve as a shield, a force field if you will, to keep anyone outside from sensing what was happening inside it. With that done, and while maintaining a firm hold on the chakra layer, the real work began. Softly, deftly, he siphoned off a tiny amount of the Kibaishiki and began work at the bones, with a skill born of numerous lives spent as a doctor, scientist, apprentice of Tsunade, and even a few times as the second coming of the snake Senin. Yup, those were dark times indeed. He coaxed the bones of his body to adapt as he wanted. Over the period of 2 weeks, every single one of his bones became incredibly dense, strong, flexible and almost unbreakable. True, it wasn't anything like a Kaguya, but it was sure as hell damn close. A side effect of this procedure was an increase in height, putting him at above average for his age group. The next step was to craft muscles to handle the increased body weight. Over the next 3 weeks he meticulously broke down and rebuilt every single muscle in his body. While he was at it, he also burned away a lot of the baby fat in his body and improved his nerves and reaction times. Then he improved on the efficiency of his body's internal organs, strengthening his heart, lungs, kidneys and other organs to function at way above peak efficiency even by ninja standards. Lung capacity increased exponentially, as well as metabolism and energy output. 5 weeks after the start of his coma, his physical attributes were way beyond what any of his peers could achieve even while boosting themselves with chakra. Without the use of chakra, he would still be the fastest and strongest the best of any ninja in his generation, and these were basically his base stats. They would undoubtedly improve as he trained himself further. Next, he tackled his brain. After all, it wouldn't do if the brain was not on par with the consciousness using it. Knowing that this was the most delicate operation yet, he took his time. With the most minuscule amount of he could get away with, he set about modifying the brain's neural pathways and augmenting various synapses, enabling his brain to process things at a significantly improved rate. In addition to the brain, he didn't forget to take care of his senses. Of course, he wasn't doing anything as outrageous as giving himself a jutsu, though after having gone down the same path as Orochimaru many times before, he knew all their structures inside out. However, What he did do was tremendously improve and fine-tune all his senses to the point where the level of perception of his eyes coupled with the processing power of his new brain ensured that a single glance was all he would need to completely understand and perfectly recall anything he saw. Simply focusing his hearing without chakra augmentation could allow him listen into a conversation hundreds of yards away. His already astounding sense of smell improved so much that a simple sniff could reveal so detailed a story. It would seem as though he was there when it unfolded. His senses were so acute that he was even capable of detecting temperature and barometric changes. At this point it was the start of the 7th week and he was almost done. The final task left was the improvement of his chakra system. Luckily enough, during the entire process of improving his new body, the act of moving Kyubishi through the body resulted in some strengthening and widening of the chakra pathways in his body. Nevertheless, it was a fairly straightforward procedure. Comparatively, he simply had to circulate as much chakra as his pathways could handle, then gradually increase the amount, much like training a muscle. If he slipped up and circulated more than the chakra pathways could safely handle, slim as the possibility of that happening was, he could easily heal it one of two ways, using a tiny amount of Kyubishi or activating the famed Uzumaki healing factor. On the note of the healing factor, centuries ago and many lives previously he had discovered that the healing factor could in fact be controlled. In particular, it turned up in varying strengths in different members of the Uzumaki clan, but without a doubt, the expression of the healing factor was the strongest ever in Uzumaki Naruto. This super factor arose as a result of being conceived by the Jinshu Uriki of the Kyubi, thus requiring that he, as a child, be able to adapt to survive the minuscule amounts of toxic ki he got frequently exposed to during the course of his growth in the womb. Naruto kept up the strengthening and widening of his chakra pathways for days on end. He also induced his body to grow a few extra tenketsus in key locations to further improve his body's chakra control. By the time he was done, it was the end of the 7th week and his body was as close as could possibly be to being the perfect killing machine. He looked upon all that he had wrought, and he saw it was good, and on the 8th week, he rested. After 8 weeks of being in a coma and the subsequent body modifications Naruto had performed, he decided it was finally time to wake up and face this new world. His timing was in fact impeccable because the academy would be resuming in 1 month, giving him more than enough time to settle and fully integrate himself into his situation before having to interact with people he had grown up with for years. Regardless of how morbid the thought, he acknowledged that little Naruto's successful attempt at suicide would provide a plausible excuse for any changes in behavior that might otherwise have alarmed the people who knew him. He opened his eyes and immediately had to fight to suppress the downright shiver-inducing vulpine grin that threatened to appear on his face. From the very first moment his eyes had opened, his brain had begun rapidly processing everything in his wider than average field of vision. He focused on the dust motes floating in the air, backlit by the fluorescent bulb, and in the time between heartbeats he determined reasonably accurate estimates of each individual particle's velocity and thus subsequent path of motion, passing his hands over the sheet on his body, noticing with a deep sense of accomplishment that his motion was smooth and unhindered by the fact he had been bedridden for 2 months. He was able to feel out the individual threads that made up the weave of the sheet. He could easily smell past the lingering scent of antiseptic to the blood that had been spilled on the floor about 3 months before from a female diabetic patient. The slight smell taste of sugar in the blood gave it away. He sat up as his acute hearing picked up the heartbeats of 3 people outside the door. Focusing in on them, he picked up the scent of dogs, ozone, metal and blood, new metal, blood, slight antiseptic, and sword oil, neko probably, and finally, tobacco smoke, ink, and the slight decay brought on by age. The old man, no doubt, quickly composing his face into a calm and serene look, he turned his head so that he was gazing out of the window in his room to a spectacular view of the village with the Hokage monuments as a backdrop. He heard the sound of flesh gripping metal as the Hokage took hold of the door handle, then the sound of metal sliding on metal followed as the handle was depressed. Finally, the hinges gave a near silent squeak as the door was opened. Even with his eyes on the view outside, he easily picked up the moment when the Hokage noticed he was conscious by the slight hitch in his breathing as well as the flutter of chakra resulting from being so surprised. Inu stared at the child sitting up in the hospital bed whose gaze seemed to be fixed on the view outside. Privately he allowed himself to breathe an internal sigh of relief. Unnoticeably, of course, he had a reputation to preserve after all. Finally, he could allow himself to relax from the high-strung state he had been in for the past 2 months. The record high of A-rank missions he had completed, a stunning 17 if he recalled. No wait, yes, one of those was a mislabeled S-rank. He had left the Hokage staring at him in slight concern whenever he reported in. As he turned to return to his post in order to grant the Hokage a private moment with Naruto, he silently vowed that when the time came, he would fulfill his duty to his sensei-son as he should have a decade ago. Sarutobi felt as though the world had just decided to take a break from resting on his shoulders. Seeing that little blonde-haired child sitting up brought tremendous relief that he was not even aware he desperately needed. However, quick on the heels of the relief was stomach-churning apprehension. He had long since accepted that Naruto had attempted suicide and that he would have to address just why he felt that was the only way out for him. He walked into the room, making sure not to walk silently as all ninja worth their salt unconsciously did. He even closed the door slightly harder than he usually did, all in an effort not to startle the poor child, completely unaware that said child was bursting his gut. Trying not to erupt into belly-aching laughter, the Sandaime decided to start off the inevitable conversation. "Hello Naruto-kun, it warms this old man's heart to find you awake again," he began gently. When Naruto turned and locked gazes with him, he unconsciously stilled as that piercing blue gaze caused flashbacks of another blonde-haired man's calm and confident soul staring blue eyes. With a start he realized that something about the boy was different, not just the aura about the child. For gone was the usual childlike, sunny and impatient disposition that used to cling to him, and in its place was a more tempered and calm aura, but his looks as well. Indeed, unless his aging eyes were deceiving him, Naruto's face was more defined now, having lost most of its baby fat, and what little he could see of his body suggested he was taller and fitter than before his coma. In a quicksilver flash of intuition he concluded that the doctors must have noticed that a steady diet of ramen had done no good for him and added some extra nutrients to the 4 drip administered to him. It was a reasonable deduction and even half true, for when Naruto was improving his body, he did obtain the needed nutrients and other important proteins from the 4 drip. His contemplation of the changed child only lasted a moment and he continued his journey to the bedside seat. Naruto followed him with his eerily focused gaze, and when the old man had sat down, he opened his mouth and spoke in a smooth and even tone. "Gigi." The Sandaime was startled once again in such a short time. Anytime Naruto had ended up in the hospital he was always noticeably more exuberant than he was at the moment whenever he got a visit from him. Then he reminded himself that he could hardly expect the child to remain unchanged by the ordeal he had gone through. Naruto, who had easily followed the old man's train of thought, for he was never guarded around him, except when he asked about his parents or the reason for why he was treated as he was, had to stop himself from reacting noticeably as his theory was proven correct and any change in his behavior was put down to surviving his attempted suicide. Since he wanted to get over and done with the real reason that the Hokage was here, he said, "How long has it been since a broken bar? How long have I been a broken bar asleep?" Sarutobi noticed the change in Naruto's intended sentence as he was meant to, and replied, "You have been here for 8 weeks now Naruto-kun. Naruto-kun, can you a broken bar tell me what happened? Did someone say something to you that made you sad? Did a broken bar, did someone do something bad to you?" It was that last question that got a reaction out of him. Naruto blinked and carefully muted surprise at that. He wondered idly if this Naruto had suffered physical violence on his person, or maybe other forms of physical abuse. He immediately dismissed such dangerous thoughts from his mind. On the outside, however, he merely shook his head, and having already decided on how he should play this, he stated in the same calm and even tone he had been using. "Gigi, I was a broken bar, I was just tired." His short statement achieved its objective by leaving its meaning open to interpretation, essentially making the old man come up with an excuse for him without any effort on his part, and indeed, the Hokage did draw his own conclusions, believing that Naruto meant that the various actions and words of the vengeful and misled villagers towards him had finally gotten too much for him to bear, and really, who could blame the child? It was a testament to his tenacity that he had lasted as long as he had, and the Hokage liked to believe that it was a measure of Naruto's inherent goodness that he did not immediately turn to revenge as his way out. The Hokage never suspected a thing, for how could he? Simple and transparent Naruto had never been capable of deception when it mattered. The old man sighed and said, "I understand, Naruto, and I just want to say that I am always here for you, a broken bar always." When he saw the child nod with emotion, a gratitude finally showing in his eyes, he allowed himself to fully relax and accept that Naruto was here, alive and well. He then said, "Well, the doctors have said that once you wake up, all that remains is a quick checkup and then you're free to go. While you were here I took the liberty of getting your apartment fixed up, and now that I see you have outgrown your clothes I can have some brought for you before you have to leave the hospital." Naruto smiled at him, not his usual goofy and too wide smile, but a more subdued and real one, and said, "Thanks Gigi, I can't wait to leave here," and wrinkling his nose, he said, "It stinks." Sarutobi allowed himself to chuckle at the Naruto-ish complaint, somehow knowing that such manifestations of the bright and happy child he once knew would be rare occurrences. From now on, he knew in the depth of his two old bones that Konoha had lost something that day 2 months ago, something that they would never ever get back. Naruto paused with the key in the lock, allowing his chakra to flutter in surprise, not because of the Anbu agent who had just sneezed out, the agent whose presence he had detected as soon as he had stepped out of the hospital, but because of the fresh and clean walls surrounding his door, unblemished by a broken bar, creative and oftentimes repetitive graffiti. Shrugging, he stepped into his transformed apartment, absently noticing the reinforced ninja grade locks on his door, and now that he was paying attention, the likewise reinforced and heavier door. He let out an amused huff, got the apartment fixed up indeed. Standing in the doorway, he let his gaze span across his obviously refurbished apartment, appreciating its new copyright core, from the new and modern appliances to the far more comfortable furniture. He stepped fully into his living room, ignoring the Anbu guard trailing him, who just relocated to the tree beside his apartment building. On the topic of new things, he had to compliment whoever purchased the clothes he was wearing. His outfit, composed of a form-fitting dark blue long-sleeved shirt and black cargo shorts with steel-toed combat boots, was a definite upgrade from the orange monstrosity of yesteryears. They were very comfortable, although he didn't quite agree with their color scheme. He hadn't gotten too used to donning red and black, and would have to see about acquiring some clothes similar to those he had worn in past lives. Perhaps he would even get back to wearing that face mask like Kakashi does. He sat on his couch and decided to finally tackle the main obstacle to his complete integration in this reality, and that was researching the history of the world, a seemingly inane thing to worry about, but he remembered once, many lives ago, publicly idolizing the Yondaime Hokage only for a mob made up of ninja and civilians to attempt to kill him. Much later, after he had reduced Konoha to a smoking and barren wasteland, he found out that the major change in this world was that Namikaze Minato was the Godaime Hokage, and Orochimaru's successor. Moving on, he easily hatched a plan of action. He was aware that the tree outside his apartment afforded any skilled individual the ability to see into his living room but not his bedroom, so, under the guise of checking out the changes made to his bedroom, he casually walked inside it and seamlessly produced a cage bunchen without any evidence to give it away, making sure that the spike in chakra was the same as the one he let out in front of his apartment when he feigned surprise at the new copyright core. The Anbu outside never suspected a thing. While his clone hid in the bedroom, he wandered back out and eventually left his apartment with a book, which, going by the annotation in it, was left to him by Jiraiya as a birthday present. Not that the old Naruto would have been able to deduce what the scribbled signature of oil stood for. He made his way to the top of the Yondame's head and sat down to read, easily sensing the Anbu guard settle down to read what was no doubt an orange book. Meanwhile, back at Naruto's apartment, the moment the Kage Bunshin felt his creator leave and the Anbu follow him, he set out to fulfill the task for which he was created. With no warning, his body smoothly shifted into that of an average-looking 10-year-old with perfectly ordinary features, brown eyes and hair. He left the apartment and made his way to the Konoha Public Library. He nonchalantly walked inside, politely greeting the librarian at the front desk, who smiled back at the polite young man. He asked her if she could point him in the direction of the history section, saying he needed reference books for his project on the timeline of the elemental nations. When the librarian expressed surprise at such a seemingly involved project for one so young, he admitted to her, with a sheepish smile, that his father had been trying to get him to pay attention in history lessons, and finally just decided to ransom a promised trip to the festival. He hoped that by doing the project he could convince his dad that he had turned a new leaf, so to speak. Chuckling at the impatience of today's youth for things like history, she pointed out the necessary section for him. The clone followed her directions and easily located various books written from different perspectives of ninjas and civilians alike. How old, a total of 6 relatively thick books. He set the books down at a desk and began reading. 15 minutes later he was done. He set the books back in their place and wandered over to the section set aside for the Ninja Academy. He speed read the various textbooks, easily deducing the syllabus for all the years of the academy as well as brushing up on the material taught. He had plans to skip a lot of days in the academy and was gratified to note that the final graduation exam accounted for 70% of a student's grade. For all their years in the academy, a dead last student could easily end up in the upper 25% of his year at the end of the day. Finally, the clone went to attend to his last task, the history of various wars and battles fought, as well as notable deeds of various ninjas. The purpose of reading about such was twofold. First and obvious was the fact that it would not do to be ignorant of so and so famous person who everybody knows and whatever famous deeds they performed. Second, and more subtle, was the fact that reading about various famous deeds would give Naruto an idea of what people were capable of. For example, in some realities, space-time manipulation was never discovered, and so using jutsu like the Irishin caused far more trouble than it was worth. By the time the clone had finished, having taken some extra time to peruse books on foraging, and geography, he had been in the library for 2 hours. He left, pausing at the front desk to thank the librarian, and left with a mischievous smile and a promise to bring her a souvenir from the festival. She laughed at his adorable cheek and waved him off. The clone walked out of the library and using a technique Naruto had created a long time ago when he got frustrated by the Kage Bunshin's limitations in terms of memory transfer. The clone sent a clump of its memories from the past 2 hours along the link that all shadow clones shared with their creator. The technique negated the need for a clone to disperse every time it wanted to share its experiences, thus adding significantly to the overall effectiveness of a clone during its lifetime. With that done, the clone walked down a deserted alley and vanished with no smoke, sound or trace. Gone. Between one moment and the next, the clone appeared in one of the deserted training grounds closer to the outskirts of the village. Indeed, as you might have guessed, he was in search of a suitable place where the original could train, somewhere well away from people and with the smallest possible risk of discovery. The training ground was not his final stop, however. He walked with a determined gait towards the trees that surrounded the forest, walking in a direction that would put him eventually at the wall surrounding the village. Before he could get that far, he emerged into a clearing. It bore the marks of area effect ninjutsu, evident by the various scorch marks, damaged equipment, felled trees, and in some places rust-brown stains denoting where blood was spilt. These clearings arose as a result of ninjas who wanted to test out some ninjutsu of the army killing persuasion. Out of courtesy, said ninja rarely ever experimented in official training grounds, not wanting to damage them and prevent others from making full use of them. The clone carefully memorized the location of the clearing and left to another part of the village to repeat the process. After 3 hours of searching, the clone had found and memorized the locations of a total of 11 such accidental training grounds, 3 of which had signs of use in the past year and were thus cut out of consideration. One of the potential training grounds had a waterfall, nothing too outrageously big, but more than sufficient for wind-natured chakra training among other things. Having accomplished all that he had set out to do, the clone disappeared without a trace, and this time for good. On top of the Yondame's head, Naruto gave no indication whatsoever that he had received the memories of his clone. He smoothly stood up and dusted off non-existent dirt from his shorts. He sensed the attention of the Anbu on him as he stood and surveyed the village. Perhaps he is worried I might jump. He inhaled the clean and fresh air, held it in for a beat, and then exhaled. With one last glance at Konohagakure, he turned to return to his apartment. Arriving at his apartment once more, Naruto went about preparing a simple dinner. He made a mental note to read a cooking book in plain sight of one of his watchers before he began to prepare gourmet dishes. On that thought, he should probably start taking the chance to convince anyone watching him that he had taken up reading as a hobby. It was never fun when people started getting suspicious and watching him so close that it became a bother for him to cut loose and have fun. After all, he has found that people have the tendency to start giving him narrow-eyed looks when they discover he is a master blacksmith, hunter, tanner, tailor, chef, builder, artist, a broken bar. Well, you get the idea. The thing with living forever is that you have the time to do anything, and so eventually, you do. A broken bar. After eating and cleaning up, he went through the motions of getting ready for bed, and after securing his apartment he turned off all the lights, climbed into bed and went to sleep. A few minutes later, Nico arrived to relieve me, said Kakashi as he finished his report of his day guarding Naruto. The Sandame exhaled a stream of tobacco smoke and closed his eyes. Turning to one of his most prodigious jounin, he said, "Thank you, Kakashi." Noticing that his ninja seemed to have more to add, he inquired, "Is there something else?" Visibly hesitating, Kakashi finally sighed and said, "No, Hokage-sama." Giving him an assessing gaze, the Hokage decided to let it rest. "Very well, you may leave. Thank you for your good work." With a bow, Kakashi vanished from the Hokage's office in a cloud of smoke, and the old man turned back to his work, hoping to finish soon and go home. Moments earlier, the moment Naruto sensed the incoming chakra of Neko, he carefully molded his chakra in preparation, and when Neko arrived, causing a slight spike in her chakra, he burst into motion. He seamlessly and smokelessly created a cage bunchen beside his bed, and in the same motion switched out with clone, and without losing a beat vanished from his apartment. All in the time it took the chakra spike of Neko's shunshin to die down, thus effectively masking his actions from detection by the two Anbu outside. Naruto materialized at the first of the 8 clearings he was going to convert into his personal training grounds. He created 10 highly charged shadow clones and departed for the next clearing. As Naruto left, his clones spread out, and by the time they had stopped moving, each clone stood in front of a tree. From above, the formation of the clones would have looked like a circle with 10 points placed at regular intervals, moving in sync. Each clone held up a finger and forged a small vivid blue chakra blade. Together, they began to carve seals into the trunks of the trees they stood in front of. Having already moved through all 8 clearings, Naruto arrived back at the first clearing and assumed a meditative pose to prepare himself for step 2. In all the 8 clearings his clones were hard at work inscribing seals in increasingly complex patterns on 10 trees. Meanwhile, Naruto had begun his own portion of the task. Very carefully he gathered and molded a huge amount of chakra and kept a firm hold on it. Reaching out with his senses, he examined the chakra of the trees, plants and animals around him, essentially getting a read on the exact frequency, if you will, of the background chakra of the clearing. Then with absolute focus he began to mutate the nature of the chakra he had molded. Step by step, the chakra began to change from one that was unique to Naruto until finally it was indistinguishable from the chakra that saturated the surroundings. And right in Time 2 for he sensed through the link he shared with all his clones that they had just finished inscribing the seals. Now came step 3, reaching out again. He grasped all 80 chakra links to his shadow clones and gave the shadow clones the go-ahead to do their parts, with the active chakra link between themselves. The clones were able to act in sync simultaneously. They molded all their remaining chakra into neutral natured chakra, placed their hands on the seals they had just carved and activated the seals they had just carved, making sure to halt the activation process just before its conclusion, essentially leaving the seals in a state of suspended animation, much like drawing a circle and stopping just before closing it off. Now for the most delicate part of the entire procedure, a broken bar with his clones' minds right there with him. Naruto portioned the carefully prepared chakra into 80 equal parts and after making sure that all his clones were ready, sent them out along the chakra links with each chakra packet traveling at a speed that ensured that all the clones received them at the same time. As the clones felt the chakra packets arrive, without interrupting the flow, they fed the chakra into the suspended seals, and just as the last of the incoming chakra was sucked into the seal, they closed the loop, completing the charging and activation of the seals. Owing to the neutral nature of the chakra used, no ninja sensed the chakra spike, and the hidden nature of the clearings ensured that the resulting light show went unseen. After the chakra eruption had died down, Naruto dismissed all his clones. Getting up out of his meditative post, Naruto probed the newly made barrier around the clearing he was in, checking to make sure that all the features he had intended were present in the barrier and that nothing went wrong. He was satisfied with what he found. Now, no one but him would be able to find any of the 8 clearings, and even those who might have known about their existence in the past would just conclude that the trees must have regrown after they realize that they can't find any clearings outside the training grounds. After all, who knows what the trees grown by the Shodaime are capable of. With all that done, Naruto could then get around to training up his body to flow smoothly with all the moves and reflexes he had acquired over his very long existence. It was always ultimately easier to have a body that didn't fight against ingrained reflexes and motions. Moving to the edge of the clearing, he flexed his chakra and suddenly 500 shadow clones existed in the previously empty place. Checking to ensure that they would have enough chakra to see them through the night, he left them as they began grouping themselves into different squads, each of which would run through the katas of a different taijutsu style. He moved to the other shielded training grounds and repeated the same procedure, leaving clones that would acquire proper training in the use of the 5 elements, their various combinations as well as kenjutsu katas. With that done, he prepared to return to his apartment to get some rest. Now that he had taken care of all the necessary preparations, he could start having his fun. Just before he vanished from the clearing he was in, he watched a batch of clones juggle Rasengans amongst themselves and mused absently that he should build a blacksmith's forge in one of those clearings to make custom weapons, and then with not as much as a whisper, he was gone.